Over half of all doctoral students leave without finishing. These are just some of their stories. Leaving grad school is a video overview of their experiences and my experience in leaving. It's a reminder to everyone and to you to choose what's best for you in your life. Hey my dudes, so before anything else, myself and other people in this video will be discussing things ranging from struggles with mental health to cancer to discrimination and other topics that might be really triggering. So if any of these topics are difficult for you, please proceed carefully. Your mental health comes first. I'm not making this video for pity or clout or whatever else. What's really pushing me to make this video is just the stigma, the shame, the guilty feelings that come with leaving a PhD program, specifically a US PhD program, because it's a very specific experience. I'm not trying to encourage anyone to leave a PhD program, but I do want to encourage you to pick whatever decision feels best for you and your life. If you are making this decision and you are going through some sort of tough choice like this, hopefully you can relate to some of these stories, find solace in them, find some validation in them, and just not feel so alone in the process. This video is divided into chapters where I've grouped similar thoughts and feelings about leaving a PhD together. You'll hear from 11 people who left, wish they had left, and even people who finished. After that, I'll get into my reasons for leaving, which are professional but mostly personal. There's this culture around stick it out and that you've somehow failed if you choose to leave, whether that's because you want to go be with family or pursue other passions or pursue your career or just don't want to do the PhD anymore, which is also a perfectly valid reason. And to anyone outside of academia, getting into grad school or just getting a master's instead of a PhD is still a really big deal. But to anyone in academia, it's like oh, so you weren't smart enough. Roughly half of all doctoral students leave without finishing. And to some, that number is really alarming. It's a lot of money, it's a lot of brain power that's leaving. If a person is leaving due to harassment, racism, discrimination, financial hardship, all these other types of factors, it's a genuine problem. But there's a lot of people who also choose to leave because of a personal choice or a professional choice. Ultimately, that is their choice and a perfectly valid choice to make. In academia, you get far by being smart, and there's this sense of how, the pursuit of knowledge is the most important thing, so a lot of bullying is based on intellect and being shamed for not knowing something. Making someone feel bad about leaving a PhD program is wrong, but also thinking less of someone because they left a PhD program is also wrong. Getting into grad school is really tough. There's essays, interviews, the financial burdens. I spent $1,000 on my apps, including the mandatory GRE test. And then you get to grad school, and being in grad school is really tough. You're overworked and you're underpaid. Work and life blends together in very, very many ways in academia. Academia is especially tough if you're female, if you're BIPOC, if you're LGBTQIA+, and I'm all of these things, any kind of marginalized person, really. And I don't even have it that bad. The summer of 2020 really brought to light how terrible some of these things are. Academia is just so freaking racist. Here's just a few screen grabs of the hashtag Black in the Ivory. And as I was reading these, all I could think of was, these are the people who feel comfortable enough to step forward. What about the people who can't even do that? But both of those things, getting into grad school and being there, are celebrated, and rightfully so, they are accomplishments. But leaving is different. I talked online about being in grad school, so I want to have a real conversation about leaving. So I'm hoping that by sharing my story, it helps destigmatize some of the shame that comes associated with it. But my story isn't the only one out there. To my knowledge, this is the first time these experiences have been compiled together in an effort to kind of see what kind of themes are emerging. I'm hoping that you guys can not feel so alone if you are also struggling with something similar, or even just struggling with staying in your PhD.
I left my PhD over 20 years ago, and even then it was a really difficult decision.
The decision for me to leave grad school was pretty difficult. I had a lot of my identity wrapped up in my graduate research. I kind of really thought that my research, if it ever worked, would be the way that I made the world a little bit better of a place.
Quitting graduate school was definitely the hardest decision of my life. It felt like I was grieving a version of myself that I thought I would be. It felt like a failure, like I was quitting or giving up.
It was very difficult to leave, in fact, especially because my identity at that time was so wrapped up in me doing science. The reaction from my colleagues was really fascinating. It was a mix of wow, because it felt like such a big deviation from the norm, right? And I think a lot of people thought I was brave. A lot of people kind of wished that they could do that. And at the same time, I think there was this sentiment of, well, you could have just sucked it up and continued on for another 4 years.
So I graduated with my PhD in 2008 in geology. And even though I graduated, there were moments, a lot of moments, where I wish I would have pulled the plug on my PhD program. It was really difficult and I was miserable almost the whole time. There actually was someone who quit the program while I was getting my doctorate. And, you know, they made the decision. They were kind of the golden child in the department. They had funding. They were really driven. They were like the poster child for a good researcher. And they just decided it was not for them. And the reaction in the department was really kind of harsh. Everybody had an opinion. They were kind of bullies about the situation. And I really felt bad for this person. At the time, I just didn't quite know what to make of them quitting. But, you know, since then, I have realized that it was brave and it was the right choice for them, even if it didn't seem like it from the outside.
I left a toxic PhD environment and really considered leaving my program. I decided to stay because I found a very supportive mentor instead. As a single mother and a grad student, that probably contributed to some of the comments that I received from my PI. I think that he saw me as wasted potential. Comments were made about me being a single parent and what I could or couldn't do. I don't think that PhD programs consider parents. Initially, I didn't really talk about it. I felt like because I had a kid as a teenager, I feel like there's a stigma. I didn't want that to affect people's perception about me. The initial reactions were, let's keep our dirty laundry at home.
We had a lot of international students in my program too, and I imagine that they probably struggled twice as much as I did because it's a unusual experience.
I believed all my life that I was going to be in academia for the rest of my career. I thought at the time that that was the only way that I could have any respect or value in society. It was very hard for me to accept that that was a completely false and toxic notion. But because I didn't know anyone who had quit their PhD, it took me a long time to get the courage to take the leap and get out of academia.
I was fortunate in the sense that I had a really supportive mentor, really enabled me to pursue some other things in my free time. And through doing that, I discovered that I was so much better at that and really enjoyed it so much more than my PhD research. So I decided to leave and I decided to pursue those opportunities instead. But I still had to kind of disentangle myself from that piece of my identity that was all tied up in science research. And that took a long time, but once I did, I was a lot happier.
I'm really fortunate to have a mentor who's supportive of me going to work outside of academia after grad school. He actually told me that I should not pursue a faculty position unless I feel like that's what I need to do to be happy in life. And that was really nice to hear because it makes me feel like I can take time away from research to prepare for other careers. If I couldn't do that, I think I would be more inclined to leave grad school.
I left my PhD program in cancer biology almost 7 years ago this spring, which is really wild to think about. I left because I realized I was no longer fulfilled by scientific research and I wouldn't really be able to focus on a project for the length of a PhD.
You may encounter some people that won't think you're smart because you don't have a PhD. But frankly, there's no one that knows everything. There's so many different kinds of intelligence. And the longer you're on the planet, the more you know that you don't know anything. Something I think is really important to know is that having a PhD does not make you smart. making choices that are good for you and for your family and for your community, that is smart. Another thing that makes you smart is acting on things you learn on your own personal journey. So maybe when you started this, you thought you really needed a PhD, and maybe you do, depending on what your career goals are. But if you've learned that it's not where you want to go, it's okay to make a choice in a different direction. And that is a smart thing.
The thing I realized about the person leaving the program and what I've realized since I have graduated is that everyone is going to have an opinion about what you do with your life. They'll have an opinion if you finish your PhD. They'll have an opinion if you don't finish your PhD. And at the end of the day, you have to realize what is best for you, how you want to live your life, what your career goals are, and then make decisions based on that, not on what you think other people will think of you.
Getting in touch with my advisor for support on my project and financial matters was a constant struggle that only got worse with time, and it was a huge factor in aggravating my anxiety. I never even got a response when I wrote to them that I had left the PhD program. The university resources turned out to be a huge disappointment, as I realized that they were not interested in helping people like me who were struggling with bad advisors.
Almost all the risk in an advisor-advisee relationship is assumed by the graduate student. If it turns out to be a bad fit, the student will either have to put up with a bad situation or start over their degree entirely, whereas little will change for their advisor. I had trouble progressing in my degree, largely because the lab environment wasn't a very good fit for my ADHD. I tried to get accommodations to make the lab a better fit for me because changing myself wasn't an option, but I had a lot of trouble and there weren't a lot of resources and weren't a lot of people there to help me. So I left the lab and have been working on my own without an advisor for over a year now. It's been the happiest, healthiest, and most productive year of my PhD. Even though I'm producing, I'm publishing, I'm presenting new data at conferences, I can't get a degree because I don't have an advisor. Advisors aren't formally trained in how to be good mentors, so they have trouble dealing with the diverse problems their students encounter. Even if they wanted to become better mentors, there are few resources for them, and getting training requires they do it on their own already limited free time.
One of the things that was frustrating in my program was just the lack of mentorship and guidance. It often felt that I was just kind of shooting in the dark. It's definitely a me thing that I was afraid to ask for help, but I also think help should have been provided regardless. If I were to rock the boat or something along those lines, it was a, fast track to be ostracized. Faculty was just, I had to go through it, and now you do too.
Academia is a little unique in that I don't think it has any desire to evolve. A lot of fields, industries, like tech, they're always trying to do the next best thing. But in academia, nobody's interested in making it better. That ends up contributing to the toxic expectation that it's as hard as possible for people. As graduate students, you're just sort of supposed to accept misery. If you question that, the response is typically something along the lines of, well, we all had to do it. Why can't you? I failed my first qual, and I was talking to this professor, and he was like, why did you fail? I was dealing with depression at the time, and I was in a new place. And so I said all these things, and he looked me in the eye and he said, well, we all went through that, so what's wrong with you?
The academic environment that I was trying to do all of this in wasn't very supportive. It was pretty caustic, kind of at the departmental level. There was a lot of kind of pushing people down when they had flaws in their ideas. The approach to teach was to just point all of those out and be really critical. But on the flip side, there wasn't a lot of encouragement when you did have a good idea. That was kind of expected. It was what you were supposed to be doing as a graduate student. And I didn't thrive in that kind of environment.
So we had this unwritten rule that you had to be tough. We actually joked about not buckling.
It's really hard to describe them in a way where the people that are committing these, mostly white people, can actually understand them because they've never been through that. Like the types of stares that you might get, how somebody's body language might change when a person of color enters the room. It's really hard to explain that to somebody that's never experienced that. It takes a toll when it happens regularly. I feel like a lot of the things I've experienced and some of my other scientist friends of color have experienced are just hard to put into words. We developed these reservations about mounting complaints. The wide academic culture leads us to feel that we should be grateful to even be let in. If we complain, then we are ungrateful. Things were happening to me, but I still didn't want to complain because I didn't want to be ungrateful. I always carried that feeling, well, like I'm lucky to even be let in, because most of the people that look like me, they're not in PhD programs. They're picking up the trash and they're serving the food.
It was a really isolating culture. The experience definitely triggered some depressive episodes as well. It ended up really influencing my mental health. I already struggle with anxiety, and mental health was a lot of the reason why I ended up leaving, was just for a healthier lifestyle, because I clearly wasn't going to find it in academia. I felt like I had to fit a mold, and if I didn't fit that mold, then bye. Like I failed if I couldn't kind of live up to these external, unwritten standards.
I was suffering from mental health issues before my PhD, but it was made significantly worse during my time in the graduate program. In the end, I was just so exhausted and destroyed. It was unbearable. And I know that it will take a long time for me to recover both physically and mentally from that experience.
I found it really frustrating that the finish line kept moving. No matter how far I went, I always was kind of pushed to go further. And it just felt like, well, when is it enough? And I never felt like enough. I never felt like my work was enough, my scholarship was enough, I was enough. And I took that really personally.
I feel like no matter how good my research is, I'm unwelcome in academia because of my disability.
One of the main reasons I wanted to leave was because I didn't feel like they valued me as a student, as a person. They didn't really care about whether I stayed or not. And so I really want to leave.
When you hear about people leaving grad school, it seems like they just disappear and they're not part of the academic community anymore.
Academia is really insular. I feel like I burned a lot of bridges and haven't quite reconciled those yet. Getting an industry job rather than an academic job makes it seem like I can no longer relate to academia, even though I ended up, using the theory that I studied and founding a successful startup. It doesn't matter. And so no matter what I do, I can never kind of be back in that echelon. I don't know if I will ever kind of reconcile those relationships, but I feel like I don't miss them and they certainly don't miss me. I owe a lot to the success of my business, to what I learned in grad school, not only the theory, but like learning how to operate in a professional setting and learning what not to do.
Because I made that choice for family, I don't regret it. Looking back, I would do the same thing again.
I think it took a lot of strength to decide to leave. So I'm very proud of myself for making that decision, and I don't regret it even a little bit. The day that I made the decision, I cried, but like after all the crying was done, I felt like this huge sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. And then literally like in the days after, I just felt better. I felt like I had more energy. So I was like, wow, that was the right decision.
At this point, I really don't regret doing it sooner. I think I needed the time in grad school, and also I took about a year after I graduated college and before I started grad school. So I had a sense of the real world and the research world, and all those experiences better informed me on the path that I am here today. And the most fascinating thing right now, I would say, is when I talk to other scientists who I interview for my job and, explain to them I have this background. And sometimes I'm even interviewing people who interviewed me for their PhD programs. They're usually surprised to hear that I'm working in science communication as a science journalist right now. And they also really quite love it. I don't think anyone has really shamed me for leaving grad school. It's more been a good for you sort of situation.
This is just a small collection of thoughts out of many more, but thank you to everyone who shared their experiences for this project. So in addition to what happened in my personal life, and I'll get into that in a second, a big reason that I wanted to leave was for my career. I didn't know that science communication was a thing until maybe like the first week of grad school. And by then I'd already signed on to do a 5+ year program. I was one of the lucky ones. I had an incredibly amazing, kind mentor professor who was just so brilliant and understanding, and he made the whole process so much more bearable. Like, from getting into grad school, being in grad school, to leaving grad school, I am eternally grateful to him. But the number of people who told me to leave grad school was way too high. Really, any number that's higher than 0 is too high. Like, even if my personal life hadn't blown up and I still made the decision to leave for my career, it's a decision that I would have made for myself and my own life. I don't know if I would have left or not without this additional factor, but it's not something really worth wondering. My PI told me once that if you make a decision, you have to move on from wondering what if and just live with it, and that's been really good advice. So, onto the straw that broke my grad student back last year. So nervous for making this video. So, like many people, the pandemic has been difficult for me, but I also got some really difficult news that most people my age don't really have to deal with, hence my 6-month hiatus last year. I have a relatively small family. I've always wanted siblings, even though I've never had any. My mom was the one who cooked and cleaned and provided for me and like read to me at night, that sort of thing. Even if we don't see eye to eye on everything, she's the one who has provided for me and cared for me and immigrated across the entire globe and left her 7 siblings so that I could have the opportunities that I have now. I was born and raised in California. Most of my friends are all in California. I'm a very California person. Avocado runs through my veins. And at the time, my dream was to research plant genetics with an incredible mentor. And I got that dream. I was so ecstatic to have that dream, but it came with a pretty big catch, which was that it would be 3,000 miles away across the continent of North America, all the way in North Carolina. That's like the equivalent of from Spain to Russia. But that was my dream, so I left to North Carolina, but I knew that life would continue to happen in California even while I was away. A PhD program is very long, anywhere from 5, 6, 7, sometimes even 9 years, and shitty things happen all the time, but I just wasn't really prepared for this. I think it's just really hard to say this out loud because it just makes it all the more real, even though it's been real for a year. So, my mom has cancer, and her diagnosis came right at the start of the pandemic. Literally like March of 2020. Great timing, I know. That was the start of the pandemic, so there were a lot of things going on. There was no toilet paper anywhere. Hospital staff were wearing trash bags. People were dying. People are still dying. As I record this, 500,000 people in America have died due to COVID. But I found out, and I booked a flight the exact same day, flew back to California. I left my cats with my then roommate. Shout out to her for taking care of them for so long. I quarantined for 2 whole weeks in an isolated place by myself. That was really rough. It was just constantly crying about what the hell I was gonna do and not knowing if I had caught COVID on the plane, and everything was just a mess, and everything was just really fresh. After those 2 weeks passed, I got tested just to like triple check, because obviously you don't want to give COVID to someone who's got fucking stage 4 cancer. And then I went to go see mom. And I don't really want to get into the details here for Google MD people to come at me, but it's rough. It's getting worse. It's terminal. At first I was like, there's no way this is gonna happen. She's 55, she's active, she's hiking, she's swimming, she's taking care of herself. Like, there's no way this could happen. That hope that was there got smushed pretty fast. And once it became clear that there was no hope, I had to make a decision. Do I move back to California in the middle of a pandemic with no job, no place to live, and leave behind my PhD, also that I can be with my mom as much as possible? Of course, that wasn't even a question in my mind. Of course I should. I wound up staying from the start of March 2020 till the end of June 2020, and during this time I was a wreck, but I had to be a productive wreck because there was so much shit to figure out, right? There's housing in the Bay Area isn't exactly a walk in the park. There was finding a job, everything was in a hiring freeze. How was I going to move my cats over? Where was I going to find toilet paper? Because that was still a concern at this time. So I entered this like weird, manic, depressed, anxious headspace. I literally have never worked so hard in my life as I did the summer of 2020, and I never want to be in this headspace again. I was sleeping next to my laptop like some kind of weird computer lover, and I would sleep next to it so that when I woke up at like 5 a.m. I could drag it closer to me and immediately start working. I had like 1 or 2 meals a day. I would throw them up quite often because of just the sheer anxiety of everything. I was working like 80 hours a week trying to figure out like housing and applying for jobs incessantly, but also trying to figure out how I was going to leave. And when I went to bed, I would have these nightmares. I would have sleep paralysis. For anyone who knows what sleep paralysis is, it's not fun. Crying all the time. And I went down rabbit holes of just like, what in the world can I possibly do that would make mom feel better? Is there anything that would even make mom feel better? And even now, I think what's really awful about it is just like, there's this terrible thing that's happened and this terrible thing that's about to happen, and everything in between is also like this undercurrent of like feeling terrible. And I'm just like living in anticipation of this terrible thing happening, and it's gonna happen and it's gonna be shitty, but it's shitty now too, right? Like, it's all shitty. I don't know, I think there's power in being grateful for the things you've experienced and how they formed who you are now, and there's this whole like, oh, you're so strong, but like, I don't want to be this type of no one wants to be strong through trauma. And so I was, and I still really am struggling with self-worth and like comparing myself to other people who don't have to go through this, because it's just, this sort of stuff is not the stuff that other people see, right? Like, this is all just some invisible struggle, and like, it's not like you can walk around and tell the person who's trying to hire you or the person that you're working for, I've been thinking about how this terrible thing is going to happen, and but hey, at least I'm productive right now, and that's what matters, right? Because capitalism, baby. So 2020 was rough, but 2021 is also still rough. I don't know why people thought things would magically get better just because the calendar date changed. Things with mom are still rough. I'm oscillating between like being okay because I've had a year for prepping for this, but also like not being okay because you can never really prep for this. And sometimes I find myself throwing myself into work a whole lot more to escape, but at least it's not as bad as it was last year, so that's good. But it's like I'm constantly drowning, and it would be great to learn how to swim, except the current keeps getting stronger, so instead I just throw myself into my work or creating, because then that lets me forget that I'm drowning. But at the end of the day, I'm still drowning, while getting rewarded by capitalism, so that's at least something. I don't know. It's not the healthiest, but it at least helps me channel my energy. So I won't lie, things got really dark, and anyone who struggled with mental illness knows that there are places that you shouldn't go to. There are places you should not let your mind wander to, these dark mental paths that are not really you. And I've been to these dark, really hopeless places before, and sometimes in grad school, sometimes before. But I have really amazing friends, and they help me push through all of it. A huge, huge thank you to every single one of them who helped me then and continue to help me now in ways that I didn't even know were possible. Friends really are the family you choose. Special shout out to the people who gave me concrete suggestions on how they could help, because it's hard to answer the question, how can I help? Because at the time I was making so many choices. I was so burnt out. I just got anxious, like wondering, I don't know, like what if they're just saying this to be polite? Like, spoiler alert, some of them were just saying it to be polite. Or what if I asked them was too much? But I also knew I couldn't go at it alone. So shout out to the friends who just helped me, sent me food, listened to me, drove me across the country, helped me move. everything you guys did. I am so grateful for you. I have no clue if my therapist sees this channel, but shout out to them too. My therapist also helped me realize that there's no right way to really handle this whole situation other than just surviving it. So, I mean, I seem to be surviving relatively okay. So there's been a lot of positives in addition to all of this hardship. I was able to leave with my Master's of Science from Duke, but I'm happy just for what is. I've missed California a lot. I'm glad to be home. I'm really glad that I can see my mom, and at least I have like a heads up before it happens. That's something to be grateful for. I'm doing the career I want. I'm living in the city I want. I'm living in the exact neighborhood I've dreamed of living in for the past 4 years, so that's pretty cool. Things are pretty okay. I'm almost like scared to say that. So I don't know, if it weren't for the pandemic and mom dying and the general climate change, patriarchy, racism, capitalism, institutionalized nonsense that generally exists, life would be pretty okay. I wish I had a good way to end this video, but the reality is that I don't. I'm struggling with the idea of not being able to have a mom, of the idea of like being alone in this like very specific way. I am really proud of myself for surviving this far, and I know it'll be okay eventually, keyword eventually. But I am really happy with my decision to leave grad school, and I 100% would do it all over again in a heartbeat. Ultimately, I just want to minimize the number of regrets I have, and I would happily do any choice that brings me closer to be able to spend time with mom every time I can. If you're watching this and wondering whether you should leave or stick with academia, just don't make the choice based on shame. Don't listen to others who don't have to live your life, because you're the one who has to live it. If you or someone you know is struggling with grad school, I suggest checking out PhD Balance. They have a whole host of resources. You can also donate to them. Link is in the description box.